Hello, welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is December 4th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga via email at schillerinstitute.org, questions at schillerinstitute.org, or post them in the chat page. Helga, your late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, once said that reality is a harsh taskmaster, but there can be no solutions unless people face reality, which is not easy in the transatlantic world where we're bombarded with narratives that are presented by the very people who are pushing wars and depression. So the mobilization of a lifetime, which you called for this week, begins with facing reality. So I think, therefore, we should begin today with your summary of where things stand in a world undergoing dramatic change. What is the reality we must face?
Well, I think the world has never been more close to the danger of nuclear extinction. That is being said now by many people. The latest one is Tucker Carlson, who arrived in Moscow for an interview he's going to make with Foreign Minister Lavrov. And his point is that the American people urgently need to hear the perspective from Russia, because all they get from the United States is a very one-sided view. And he made this point about that we are in a situation more dangerous than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that is, I cannot add anything, because that's what it is. What we are witnessing right now in the run-up to the date of the 20th of January, when supposedly President Trump will enter the White House and, at least change some policies, which causes quite some hysteria in the camp of the Atlanticist faction, which is allied with Biden. So what we see right now is a unbelievable destabilization of the entire world architecture. I mean, if one reads the news and tries to get an overview about where we are, one has the feeling that the entire foundation of the world system as we have known it in, even the recent period, is shaking, it's crumbling. And the most recent expressions of that is the attempted martial law imposition in South Korea, which was undone by the parliament in a swift vote. Now the South Korean trade union is mobilizing a general strike in order to force the resignation of the President Yoon. So that's one situation, and the President Yoon accused the opposition of being tied to North Korea, and it's a murky situation. But the parliament voted unanimously to undo this martial law. It's a dramatic situation right there. Then you have the ongoing effort to have a new Maidan coup in Georgia, where pro-EU demonstrators were demonstrating on the calls of the president, who is a woman who was trained and educated. She was born in Paris. She was for several decades in the diplomatic service of France. She was trained personally by Zbigniew Brzezinski at Columbia University, and then worked for NATO. And then in 2004, she became foreign minister of Georgia. So that's not exactly an expression of Georgian patriotism, but rather one of these typical installed East European people who have been groomed in the West in the post-Cold War situation to be installed and, to basically give credence to the idea that the East European countries would have wanted NATO to expand, which in many cases is just a complete orchestration because these people were promoted by, such people as Victoria Nuland. And obviously Biden played a role in all of that as well. So now you have demonstrations, you have basically the Constitutional Court just ruled that the effort by the president to declare the election null and void, that was turned down by the Constitutional Court in a vote 7-1, 7-2. So reconfirming Prime Minister Kobičice in his present course of action. But it's a highly unstable situation. And, obviously the NGOs are being supported by the West very heavily. And then you have naturally the absolutely traumatic situation in Syria, where, sort of out of the blue, I mean, obviously not on the ground, but from the standpoint of a Western observer, out of the blue, was a massive attack by new terrorist organizations, the so-called HTS, which is a short for an Arab name, which is a rebranding of the old Al-Qaeda al-Nusra organization, supported, according to Senator Richard Black, by the United States and even by the CIA. And, they are on a massive offensive against the government forces of Assad, who obviously has been weakened by years of the brutal Caesar sanctions, which have basically prevented the Syrian economy to recover. Now there are support operations coming from both Russia and Iran for Syria, for the official Syrian government. But it's a terrible situation, because obviously one aim is to cut the supply line from Syria to Lebanon in the time of the ceasefire, which has been the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, which has been broken by Israel several times. And, obviously Iran seems to be restrained by, the entire situation, because I think they're acutely aware that, that once Iran is officially entering the picture more, this could be taken as a pretext to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran. So the whole region is a complete powder keg. I cannot really judge where, how the balance of powers is and how this will play out. But it's one more area where we are on the verge of World War III, as we are in Ukraine, obviously, where, right now you have the unlikely or the amazing situation that the person of Scholz, who has been capitulating to every aspect of NATO policy, except now he is resisting to deliver the Taurus, following on the steps of the US ATACMS and the British Storm Shadow missiles and the French Scalp missiles. And, the Taurus, which have a slightly larger range, Scholz says this would be the tripwire, which would, basically put Germany as a direct war partner in war against Russia. So he's opposing it. But you have a whole cabal of stupid people who try to, try to get rid of Scholz so that they can put in Merz, who is naturally for the immediate delivery of the Taurus and naturally the medium-range US missiles to be put into Germany in 26, which would really turn Germany into an absolute war party. So Germany is under incredible attacks from all sides. The German economy is collapsing. Today, it may have happened already, was the vote to get the French Prime Minister Barnier out because they couldn't find a compromise on the budget. So whatever happens, there will be total instability for several months, at least in France, with the explosive situation in Germany. And naturally, the situation in the United States being, one of absolute tension in the period before January 20th. So I think we have to be prepared that things will go even more out of whack. And this is why we have called the International Schiller Conference to be held next weekend, this coming Saturday and Sunday, which is an effort to put together the kinds of forces of qualified speakers representing different nations and different expertise to put the solution on the table, how we could get out of this. And that is a new paradigm whereby the countries of the collective West would cooperate with the global majority rather than making Russia and China the enemy and then escalating and ending in World War III. So the most important, you, the viewer, having heard all of this, can do, you should absolutely register for the conference this coming weekend. If you register, you have access to simultaneous translation into various languages, Spanish, German, French, and you can participate in the discussion. So even if you are an English speaker, you should register, even if the live stream can be gotten elsewhere. So this will be the place where we will try to discuss what options exist, because they do exist. We can get out of this crisis, but it needs a very big mobilization of the population, because we have never been in such mortal danger than right now.
And that conference is this Saturday and Sunday starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can register for it. It's a Zoom conference or online conference. You can register for it at the schillerinstitute.com. And that certainly was a picture of a hard-hitting picture of reality. We have a number of questions, pieces of what you just presented. Let me start with the Middle East. There are two people who wrote in particular. One is a retired school teacher from Scotland. He says, what's happening in Syria is frightening. It sounds like the same terrorists who were killing Christians, Druze, and Shiite Muslims during the civil war starting in 2011 are back. There are rumors that they're being supported by the CIA, the British, the Israelis, and even Ukraine. Is there any truth to those rumors? Now, we have a second comment, which I think is very important. It's from a blogger who writes on national security. And he wrote about what Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to Biden, said when he was asked about the situation there. Sullivan said, quote, "We don't cry over the fact that the Assad government, backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, are facing certain kinds of pressure." And this blogger reminded us that in February 12, 2012, Sullivan sent an email to Hillary Clinton saying Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And he asks, how can someone like this be allowed in the government?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, it is, a fact that, first of all, there was no civil war in 2011. This was completely orchestrated and instigated from the very beginning by the same forces who are in action now. And obviously, this was an attempt to overturn the legitimate government of Assad, who, then reacted naturally, and that was being played up as, Assad the monster and so forth. But in reality, it was from the very beginning that, Al-Qaeda and Nusra and all of these groups were backed by the United States. This was the issue which General Flynn had tried to bring to Obama's attention in 2012, who didn't want to hear it. And so I think, if one looks at the chronology of these things, it is a very ugly picture. And, it is true that the likelihood that the Ukrainians are in Aleppo helping the terrorists, this was also stated by Maria Zakharova, and various other commentators said, that these Syrian terrorists do not know how to manage certain advanced technological devices relating to data and information, and that Ukrainians are actually there on the ground to help them and supply them with the necessary assistance. Now that's incredible if you think about it. That the West is backing terrorists. They're backing people who are characterized by Western sources as well as Russians, naturally, as being in the tradition of Stepan Bandera. And I think, no matter what comes out of this situation, if it's World War III, then it's a mute question. But if the dust settles, so to speak, and historians will look back at this period of history, the West right now is absolutely losing credibility by doing this. I mean, what is about democracy? What's about human rights? What's about the so-called rule of law? All of that goes out of the window. The double standard of Western policies is a topic of discussion in every corner of the planet. And I know that because I have had enough discussions in the recent period with people from all kinds of countries. And they all say, what is going on with the West? What is going on, with the formerly proud countries of Europe who had a sense of, being, decent republics or democracies, and now look what they are doing. And I think that's a sign of a dying empire. I cannot give it any other word, and we have only one way of saving ourselves, and that is that we change this policy and go back to our best traditions, which we have. We have the Italian Renaissance, we have the German classical period, we have other great traditions in Europe, which we are abandoning right now by being basically colonies of the Anglosphere, who feels that they are in a final battle against the global majority. The way out would be very easy. If you stop confrontation and declare you want to cooperate with the global majority, all of these problems could go away in a day. And I really mean it. I don't mean it the way Trump says he can save the Ukraine situation in a day. I really mean that if the West would send out a strong signal that they are reflecting, that they came to the conclusion we are on the verge of World War III. It's not worth it to sacrifice the entire existence of the human species for this battle. I know that China and Russia and all the other countries would welcome that immediately and sit down on the negotiation table, and the thing could be saved.
You're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and she is the founder of the Schiller Institute, which will be having an online conference that's open to everyone this Saturday and Sunday, and you can register for it at theschillerinstitute.com. Now, Helga, you just mentioned the Russia, China, the BRICS. There's a question that came in from a U.S. podcaster who said, I listened to what you said last week about your recent visit to China. It sounded exciting. I see you support what they're doing, but I keep hearing that China is doing some bad things. They're behind fentanyl traffic, which is coming into the U.S., and that they're still engaging in industrial espionage to steal American scientific advances. What do you make of these charges? And are these legitimate, or is it part of the war policy?
Well, I mean, it is an unbased accusation. I mean, first of all, Alexander Hamilton famously advised all of his diplomats to spy abroad as much as they can to help to build up the young American republic. Every country in the whole world has done espionage. It is not something which is, the West is not so holy that they wouldn't try to do that. Having said that, in the recent period, who is spying from whom? If you look at the Australian think tank, they have a technology tracker. I forgot now the name of the Australian think tank. I probably remember it shortly. And they have recently published that China is leading in 37 categories of 48. That means they are way ahead of the West in the majority of these areas. And therefore, when now the United States increased the tariffs, and Trump even said he would declare 100% tariffs, this is cutting in your own flesh, shooting your own the name of the think tank is SP's Critical Technology Tracker. So if you want to check it out yourself. This is a not pro-China, actually anti-China Australian think tank, and they basically said that. So in any case, China has changed its economic policy under the leadership of Xi Jinping by escalating what Deng Xiaoping had started with the reform and opening up starting in 1978. And then especially, after China joined the WTO, there was a gigantic leap forward again, by really not turning to the Western liberal model, what the West had hoped, but to turn to the 5,000 years of Chinese tradition, the Confucian teachings. And, after all, China was the leading nation until the 15th century. People have forgotten that. So it's not, it's not uncharacteristic that China would take such a leading position, and especially with the emphasis of Xi Jinping on science and technology, on innovation as being the source of productivity of the economy. China has put an enormous effort in education, in scientific breakthroughs. They're turning out every year, I forgot now the exact number, but 10 times more scientists and engineers than the United States, which in part is due to the largeness of their population, but especially due to their policies that they want to further break through technologies and make sure that they're being applied in the economy without delay, and therefore they're becoming more productive all the time. And they're doing what the United States and Europe used to do when we still were reasonable. But the West turned away from that model of what used to be called American system of economy, or Friedrich List, or cameralism, or whatever the tradition was. And they in the West turned to the speculation to make money. Make money. It was that foolish decision which my late husband Lyndon LaRouche identified when Nixon on the 15th of August 71 declared that change from fixed exchange rates to floating exchange rates. Lyndon LaRouche immediately said, if you continue on that road, it will lead to a new depression, a new fascism, a new danger of war, unless one makes a completely different economic system. And he has proven to be so absolutely on the mark. Now, more than 50 years later, we are at that point of the total disintegration of the Western financial system, which is unsolvable. It cannot be remedied, because in 2008, when we already had a systemic crisis, there would have been the chance to, really reform it and reorganize it, but they didn't do it. And they went into quantitative easing instead, and now going back between quantitative tightening and quantitative easing. But the end of the rope has been reached, because the Western financial system is sitting on 2 quadrillion outstanding derivative contracts. I think 300 trillion outstanding debt altogether. This is unpayable. And given the fact that the West has also indulged in the green fantasy, the kind of advanced technologies are not there anymore, except in very selective fields, but not in physical production. This is one of the reasons why the West cannot keep up with Russia on the military production. So, therefore, I think we are at the point of we have to stop this China bashing, because it's not truthful. China is doing what is good for China, and they have reached out and helping the developing countries to also overcome underdevelopment. But they are long beyond the point where they have to steal from the West, because they're leading. So the West can steal from China if they can. I mean, it's really important that we straighten out these facts.
Well, and one of the things we're doing in that direction is the Schiller Institute has just put out a new report titled World Development Drive Means Billions of New Jobs, No Refugees, No Wars. And it goes through, in a sense, the LaRouche plan for breaking out of this depression, this global collapse that's been caused by the Western establishment. Now, there are a lot of questions. I'll try to summarize a few of them. Here's one for you, Helga. Bethany from Spain asks, do you feel that proxy wars should be made illegal?
Yes, the answer to that is very clearly yes. The only question is how you enforce it. Um, the problem is that we have moved away from international law as it was constituted in the UN Charter, because some countries, are replacing that with might makes right. And, you can see that by the behavior in the UN Security Council. And then it comes to the question of if the UN Security Council even can make a decision, under conditions when one of the permanent five countries is permanently vetoing and therefore not coming to any legally valid conclusion. But you see it also with the ICC, that the question of enforcing is the big question. So I think the discussion going on about the urgent need to reform the UN and the UN Security Council is one of the questions which clearly are putting themselves on the agenda. I fully agree that proxy wars should not be allowed and banned, but the question is how do you enforce it?
We also had a question about enforcement of the International Criminal Court indictments against Netanyahu and Gallant, asking why the United States government continues to oppose the delivery of these indictments, and asks, is there any chance that they'll be enforced?
Under the present circumstances, I don't see it happening because, I mean, I would hope that I'm wrong, but it seems that the appointments of Trump in respect to Middle East policies, they are also very clearly leaning in the direction of being quite one-sided pro-Israel. So I think, unless you have a complete change in the international order in the direction of a new security and development architecture, which has to really put the whole thing on a workable basis, I don't see it.
And again, on this question of dialogue that you've been talking about, we have from Professor Larafi, do you think it's possible that the international community can engage in a reasonable dialogue between North and South once the major conflicts, such as Ukraine, are settled?
I think so, because, after all, we are human. Um, if I would not believe that our efforts to get such a dialogue going in the short term, I would give up and probably despair. But I'm not despairing. I think that the global majority is in a. President Putin recently said, don't think it will remain as it is. The voices coming from the global south right now sometimes sound like a cacophony rather than a symphony, because they have not yet ordered their direction. But he expressed confidence that that would soon change, and the collaboration of these nations would be like a polyphonic symphony. And I absolutely think that that's the case, because you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, my recent trip to Guangzhou in Guangdong, and that just for the umpteenth time confirmed what I have always experienced when I was in China, that the nations who are sending their representatives to these conferences, they are from a completely different spirit. They really are problem solving, they're solution oriented, they're constructive, they're trying to establish friendship, it's a completely different atmosphere. When you are only used to the thinking in the West, you think this would not be possible. But I have seen it many, many times that, there are the majority of the nations of the world trying to get a more equitable order, more just order. And I'm confident that if we can convince enough people in the United States and European nations that we can solve it, we have to solve it. The alternative is not acceptable because it's the extinction of the human species.
Now, speaking of major development projects, here's a very interesting question from Richard, who describes himself as a longtime watcher of activities of the LaRouche movement. And the title of his email was Make America Wet Again. And he said, what do you think about a campaign to get President Trump to take up making NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance, a central feature of upgrading U.S. infrastructure? And he concludes his comments by saying, if supporters of Donald Trump truly want to make America great again, surely they can't ignore that large parts of the Western U.S. are starved for water already, and it's just going to get worse. What do you think, Helga?
I think that's an excellent idea, because that would be the kind of policy that if the United States would decide to abandon the idea of tariffs against China and sanctions against this country and that country, and take an attitude, what we have been trying to say for a long time, that the United States should cooperate with the BRICS, with the global majority in development projects in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia, but then also rebuild the United States, retool the military-industrial complex, use the productive capacities which are presently used for destructive production of weapons, retool it, and then, build maglev trains or other fast train systems. The United States has no fast train system at all, not 1 kilometer or mile. It would be so easy to connect all major cities with such a fast train system, then go into basic infrastructure projects like NWAPA, bring down the water from Alaska all the way to Mexico for irrigation, for hydropower. At the same time, get more people into the middle part of the United States, which is barely populated. You can build new cities there. You can make science cities. You can do miracles. Why try to fight over some stupid oil in Syria when the United States could turn back to its own great scientific tradition and build up its own country, and then be, one of the countries of the world, respecting and cooperating with the other ones. And I think that is the way we have to go. So you should really not, sit on the fence, but help us in this campaign. And if you have some ideas how to do it in the environment you are in, just contact us, and I'm sure our various representatives in the different locals will be happy to make you part of this campaign.
Well, the person who asked that question wrote further that if you think it's a good idea, he's prepared, since he's now retired, to devote himself to getting the Trump administration to adopt this policy. So, Helga, we have the conference coming up this weekend, the Schiller Institute conference. Why don't you just talk a little bit about what you expect to come from that? Because this is something that everyone who's watching this should be organizing for full time between now and Saturday morning.
Well, I'm very confident that this conference will come out with some major new policy ideas, initiatives, because if you look at the list of speakers, it is very, very impressive. We have former heads of state, several. We have former ministers from key countries. We have top think tank people from several countries and experts, economists and so forth. But the combination, of people who agree that we need to move the world into a new paradigm is unprecedented. I'm very proud about the list of speakers we have assembled. So I can only say, if you want to hear a voice of reason, or many voices of reason, who show you a different directionality for the world to go, then, as Harley just said, use all the time you have to get your friends, your colleagues, your relatives, social media informed about this conference and make that really an impact so that people can have some hope that we can get out of this incredible crisis. So that's what you should do.
Well, Helga, I'm looking forward to the conference, and I know a lot of people are. So thank you for putting it together, and thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you over the next couple of days.
Yes, till Saturday.